So just changed a water pump out on a RSQ3. This will apply to all these 5-cylinder engines. Obviously just the chassis will be different, this being that it's a Q3 variant with the 5-cylinder. So as you can see, just below the engine mount we have the water pump pulley. We need to take the belt off, remove the engine mount, and we'll be able to remove the water pump. So I've gone ahead and removed this bracket from the engine mount, which just bolts between the chassis and the mount itself. Drain down the coolant. So I've just used a sucker, but you can just take a hose off if you'd like. So we've got to get this engine mount out of the way. I've also removed a Torx 30 bolt that was in here, just to allow me to move these pipes around so I can get this engine mount off. Next thing we'll do is we'll support the engine from underneath. Maybe we'll have to remove the under tray, I would imagine, to get to that. And then we can take this mount off completely, and then we can start working with the drive belt and stuff. Also unbolted the coolant tank just so I can move this all out of the way, and as you can see it just helps give us that bit more movement around getting that engine mount out. So I've got the engine supported from underneath. I've removed these two engine mount bolts, which are these two up here. And as you can see, there is a slight gap now between the engine mount and the body, because the engine is now supported from underneath. So what we've got to do now is we've got to get this triple square multi-spline, I believe it's a 12, undone, and then these two 16s, and then we can take this engine mount completely out. As you can see, it's quite a narrow engine mount compared to the usual 4-cylinder ones, because we've got a 5-cylinder engine transverse. I've just hooked up this reservoir bottle over to the fuse box just on a bungee cord. There's not any actual tension here, it's just literally just holding it out of my way. So yeah, either that or you can completely remove it, but it just saves me having to take the hoses off. And as you can see, I've got a decent amount of access for now. So, as I've said in my previous videos, when removing bolts, you know, we've got 3 bolts holding this thing on. These two are very accessible, but as you can notice, I've actually removed that difficult, or slightly difficult to get to, one down the bottom first, just because the whole mount is then still supported by the other 2 bolts. So always remove the hardest ones first, and as you can see, the engine mount is now completely loose, and we just need to whiz these 2 bolts out, and we've got all this room to do it in. Just to give you an idea of what I used to undo that lower bolt, was a multi-spline 12, which will be sometimes referred to as a triple square or an XZM. So there you can see what the tool looks like, and it's on a wobbly as well, just so it didn't hit the chassis. And then I used a really long 3/8 ratchet. You don't need to go this long because they're not actually that tight, just a standard length 3/8 ratchet will be fine. So there's the mount removed, and like I said, it is quite a skinny mount design, unique to this 5-cylinder setup. Now with the mount removed, we can see a lot more of the engine in itself, but mainly what we're in here for is to replace this water pump, so we can actually now see and access it. We may need to raise the engine a bit more just to get it past this chassis rail, but we will be a lot more ease of access now that we've got that engine mount out of the way. You can really see the staining at this angle as well, below this water pump, of all that coolant stain that's been coming down and leaking out from underneath it. So if you see anything like this on your 5-cylinder, then this is going to be the way to go. You can also see this is actually a 2-belt system, so there's this outer belt here, and then we also have the inner belt. So we've got to remove at least the inner belt, or detension it to get obviously off the pulley. We may have to remove the outer belt also, just for ease of access, clarity, etc. So as you can see, the belt is now off the engine, and we're now ready to start removing the water pump. one of the concerns we're going to come up against is our new water pump. We're not obviously going to fit through this gap, so we need to start raising this engine up basically, because we are going to be hitting against here. We're pretty much level with the top of the pulley with this chassis rail. Obviously the mounting point for the engine mount, so again you can see it's never going to go down. We need to come up a fair amount before we'll ever get this in or out. So rather than starting making a mess and undoing bolts etc, we'll start lifting it up. Now, one thing we have to take into account, this is a transverse four-wheel drive, so that means there's a drive shaft coming off the back. So we've got the gearbox over here, we've then got a transfer case, and it's bolted onto where the drive shaft would run across the back normally. So where we've got a prop shaft on the back, if we start raising this engine up like this, the prop shaft's going to hit the transmission tunnel, and then it will start damaging the insulation like this and pushing it into the chassis, and we'll start getting resonation problems and noises, vibrations, etc. What we actually are going to do is we're going to remove this airbox, and we're going to go down to the gearbox mount underneath here, see if we can actually move the engine slightly to one side. We'll obviously loosen the centre lower mount, or dog bone mount, whatever you want to call it, and we will see what we can get to do. That is actually what the factory workshop manual says to do, is to remove this mount, remove the lower mount, and loosen this mount if needed. Obviously different models have different setups and whatnot. I believe the TTRS would have a similar issue with this chassis rail engine mount location. I'm not sure about the RS3 as of yet. So there's just one 5mm Allen key that's down here. We'll just undo that, and then we'll put off this mount. We probably will have to take off our intake piping as well, off the airbox, and then just undo these clamps to get this intake pipe off. So once we got this mount off, we've also got this intake pipe off with the two T25s here. Just pulled this section out. If we look down inside, we can see another mount that's just on the right in here. The camera will get it, just about. So we'll basically start buzzing off this top of the airbox, and we'll get to that bolt from the inside, and we can get this airbox out. And I've got the intake tube off over here also, so the airbox is actually quite loose at the moment. So there's no actual bolts holding these on, it's just that they're very tight on their rubbers. So we'll spray a bit of lubricant on them just to soften them up, and then we'll pull the airbox up and over the rubbers. So we've now got that airbox out, and it was very tight on these mounts, so we will put some lubricant on them when they go back together, just to make it easier for the next time if they've ever got to come out. Yeah, obviously just dry. What we can do now though is we can, if we need to, we'll support the engine, and we will undo these 3 bolts, and it gives us like maybe a couple of centimetres of movement towards the chassis rail, and that might just be enough, but we can then rotate the engine enough to get this pump out. So we've got both dog bone mount bolts off as well. The front one closest to me at the top of the screen is a 16mm, and the rear one, going for the aluminium section as well, is actually an 18mm on this model. These 2 bolts need to be removed, so when we move the engine over to one side, the exhaust isn't straining against it, and it can all just move freely. So we've taken these gearbox mounts out, and I've actually got the gearbox with a jack underneath it, and as you can maybe see, got almost an inch worth of gap, I'd say, maybe half an inch, 3/4 of an inch. You can see how the gearbox has actually moved over to the right side. And like I say, I've just got a jack underneath the casing. I've taken the dog bone mount completely out. an axle stand with a lump of wood supporting the engine, so we've got no engine mounts on at present. But if we look, we've actually opened up our gap reasonably well. We've still got a fair bit more to go. But if you remember before, we had the width of this pulley was over, if I could get it anywhere near. Now I'm almost there, you know. So we're on the right track. Like I said, I've got that exhaust mount off underneath the back of the engine. I'll start undoing these mounts now, and then if I have to lower it any more, I'll lower the gearbox a bit more. It's just basically making the engine like tilt diagonally, so we can actually get this more of an angle. Basically, we're just opening up a wedge down here, and we're just opening up this as a wedge with it tilting across. So now, as you can see, to undo these bolts, you've got to actually rotate the pulley around to get them to line up. So, and then once you can get those in the right place, you can then access and undo the bolts and pull them out. So very simple in its operation. It's very small, compact water pump. But yeah, so we'll undo those bolts and get this pulled out. So there's just 3 of these Torx 30 M6 bolts holding the water pump in. As shown before, turn the pulley so it covers over the where the bolts are. They're pretty much like 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and maybe between 6 and 7 o'clock, where you can see the pulley is now. And we should be ready to pop it out now. Now I'm just going to go ahead and pry on the water pump and just see if I can pop it out. As you can see, it was quite simple. I've got a flexible funnel there just to sort of direct the coolant, maybe. That's the pump out of the actual engine itself, but as you can see, we still are pretty tight in our axis and of removal of this actual water pump. I can't actually get it to come up past, so we're just shy. So we'll lower the other side of the engine down a bit more and get it out. So you can now see I've got a decent amount of rotation from the engine mount down to the actual gearbox. Sorry, gearbox mount down to the gearbox. It's a good, maybe just over an inch. Let's gap that. And I reckon we're now very close to getting this water pump out. No guarantees, but like I said, we are very close. All I need is this to come up over the chassis rail, and this thing will be out. I'm very limited with how much I can lift this side, but the other side works very well in rotating the engine down. So I've gone a little bit more. And there we go. Now we can see our failure point just down here in our core plug, basically. So the seal hasn't actually failed in itself. The seal on the back section here, it's actually just failed past its internal bleed hole, or past that core plug that's been in there from the build process. So yeah, definitely needs replacing. And we'll whack the new one in now that we've got such an ease of getting in there. So first thing first we have to do is clean up this sealing surface. It doesn't look too bad, but we'll just give it a quick wipe over and a clean down just to make sure there's nothing that needs cleaning off of it, just for the new O-ring to seal. You see the angle that the engine is leant over at. Look at the Audi grille. How downhill that is now, so still not a massive clearance down here. It is in, like, we're probably, like I say, maybe an 1.5 inch gap. I still get my hand through there, and we're not actually touching the chassis valve at all. It just literally just does a really good rotation of the engine. And like I say, there's no engine mounts on this at present. There is no engine mount here. That gearbox mount is unbolted there, and our dog bone mount is actually on the floor there. So we're just supported on this jack and an axle stand. So when we look at the new pump, to line it up to get to the bolts, all of them accessible. If we get that arrow facing upwards, all the bolts are easily accessible. If we have it in another position, you won't get to all the bolts and you just keep having to move the pulley around, because as you can see, those holes are offset. So that's the new water pump fitted and the belt put back on, and we'll start reassembling and jacking that engine back up, etc., to get this all built back up.